Well, welcome, Elizabeth. It's good to be here
Thank you,
with you.
Richard.
And I'm very glad to have the opportunity to discuss you and your work in your new book, The Power of Enough, which has to do with money and people's relationships to money. Um, why don't we start out with a very simple question, which is when people come to you for a consultation, what is the most common money problem they report?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it in two ways. I would say the most common money statement I hear is, I want so much of it, I don't have to think about it. 9 out of 10 people walk into my office and just say some version of that. Then when I start digging into it, I think the most common problem is the complexity of money feels very complex in the financial planning piece of how do I make it all work in terms of how much I earn, how much I save, what do I invest in? How do I take care of my family? How do I plan? Is my future self in a good place compared to my present self? And then taking care of any past money issues. And so I think it's the complexity, Richard, of trying to keep their money world in their head and make sense of it, and then figure out how to make decisions in the present moment.
I see. I see. Well, uh, your book is entitled The Power of Enough. And I suppose one question that comes to mind with it, which you've also just suggested, is in money terms, how much is enough for a given person?
Yeah, so there's no, I mean, it's relative, right? It's very particular to a person situation. When we're thinking about, is it enough to live your life? And so it requires actually knowing how much you spend and what those numbers are. And so I feel like I often have a foot in both worlds. I love spreadsheets and actually sitting down and doing the analysis, and I love understanding what brings meaning to a person's world. So we always start with the first part of like, let me understand the numbers. We dive in. I tell people spreadsheets tell a story. My job is to help you read the story, and then we work backwards from that amount of what they need. And then that conversation around needs is really important. And I think it speaks to the heart of what I'm looking for in the book, because the book doesn't bring in the financial analysis. The book brings in a deeper framework of how do we understand wealth? And more importantly, how do we experience wealth? So once we get the numbers on a spreadsheet, then this is the deeper conversation of like, okay, as we start to match these amounts and categories, et cetera, let's talk through what of these expenditures are non-negotiable because they're meeting a fundamental human need in a certain way. Which of these categories perhaps are a little more wasteful because out of convenience, or I'm just not tracking, or I've actually never looked? And how do we make the plan work not more efficiently just from the numerical standard, but more efficiently from how do we help your financial and monetary decisions actually enhance your experience of meaning? So much like we compound interest in bank accounts and investment accounts, we can compound meaning in your experience of wealth by bringing more awareness to the strategies and decisions you make.
Well, a great deal of financial planning, as I understand it and have experienced it, is it has a great deal to do with the question of savings.
Yeah.
How do you approach the question of savings? One always has the impression, uh, for myself, if anyone else, I'm never saving enough and I'm always spending too much. So,
Yeah.
how does a person grapple with that, shall we say, dichotomy?
Yeah, I mean, I like the bucket approach, which is when even when it comes to something like savings, we break it out into what's that true emergency rainy day fund, right? And then we work backwards and we say, okay, is the rainy day fund 3 months of your expenditures? But you also have to take in consideration, is the emergency something that's caused by disability and you get a benefit elsewhere? Or is it full, I have to cover this expense by myself? That's the rainy day savings. Then there's the travel savings or the hobby savings, or I wanted to publish a book savings and there's going to be an expense. What I like telling people is that if you have clarity on what you're saving for, and one, and two, you automate the savings at the beginning of the month versus trying to go backwards and save at the end of the month, savings actually happen. And I think the third thing that I like to tell people about savings, Richard, is that I hear it all the time. People are like, well, I save, so I want money to go in one direction, which is in, right? I want it to go into the bank account and I never want to take it out. And the reality is life happens. We have emergencies. We change our tires, right? Our plumbing pipe or bursts in the house. Or I have a client right now who has a newborn and is needing to hire a night nurse. We do need to also be able to understand that we saved that money for unexpected things. And it's at times we get to use it, right? Or if you have a travel fund, the idea is that you actually spend that on experiences by yourself or with those that you love. And so saving is only half of the strategy. The other strategy is knowing what it's for and being able to be fluid with the savings.
Well, one type of savings that you're never supposed to withdraw from, as I understand it, is retirement savings. That is to say, you don't draw on your 401k or your IRA, ideally until you're retired. I mean, of course, barring extreme emergencies. So how does someone fit that type of savings into the larger picture?
In what sense?
Uh, well, I guess one thing is like, how much should you really be saving for your retirement?
Well, it's so relative, Richard, in the sense of, I mean, there's the back of the napkin rule of thumb, 10%, but I just don't approach financial planning in that perspective, right? Because it's so personal, depending on, can you save more than that? Great. Are you an entrepreneur that will never retire from your work versus a W-2 who's counting the days on their calendar? So do you see how it's different? Like, I will never retire from my work as long as I'm able-bodied. I might change what I do in some capacity. Maybe I want to work less. So it's hard. And I think going back to your first question, what's the main question that people walk into my office is like, how does this apply to me? And I think that's a big piece kind of in our general relationship to money, is like being like, oh my God, there's all this financial literacy, all these rules of thumb. How does this apply to me? And I think the reason why I wrote this book, The Power of Enough, that absolutely has almost like no investment in savings advice, was because the first starting point in how this applies to me is knowing what your relationship with money is. Because if you start there, then you actually start to feel like money is a friend, is a guide, has a voice as we start to create a plan. And it starts to actually make all of the planning process become more alive, more vital, more dynamic, and make more sense. Because money can feel really abstract to a lot of people. And the best piece of advice I can give someone is that, like, roll up the sleeves, put pen to paper, and understand what your financial life looks like. But equally, roll up the sleeves, dive into your heart, dive into your body, and see, how do you experience your relationship to money? Both are equally important.
One feature of your book is that you describe having a conversation with money.
Yeah.
Could you go into what that is and what you mean by that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So it's a Gestalt chair exercise, which, it's a therapeutic exercise that allows us to really animate that relationship. And so what I mean by it and why it's such an important tool is because we tend to scapegoat money with a lot of unprocessed emotions, right? We get angry at it when it doesn't show up. We get frustrated if I get an unexpected tax bill. Like, we're just always feeling angst. Or if your kid's like, I want that, and you're like, I don't know if I can afford it. And so what a conversation with money does is it gets to the root of what the emotional experience you're having with money. And so it's set up in a very simple empty chair exercise, which means the first step is you get to choose what object you want to represent money, because that's what you're going to be talking to. You put two chairs in front of each other or two meditation pillows, but you create the space for a conversation. Really important. It's a conversation. It's not a monologue. Then the third step, right? You get to decide how close you want those chairs to be. Are you wanting a little more intimacy with money? You pull it closer to you. You need a little more distance. And then fourth, you get to go first. And I tell people, put a timer on your phone, say 5 minutes. And for 5 minutes, you get to share what you're feeling emotionally with money. And I encourage people to use the I statement, like, I, money, am feeling so frustrated or angry, or I am so excited to see you. What's the first thing that comes out? Follow that flow for 5 minutes. When the timer goes off, close your eyes, take a breath, and then literally get out of your chair, switch chairs. So now you're sitting in the seat of money. You hold your money object on your lap. And now money gets the exact same time, 5 minutes on the timer, to respond to anything it heard. And you do that a couple times, 2 to 3 times, and then you take a stop and you just take a step from that conversation and just sit with, what's the emotion that came up? What's the voices? Who was I actually talking to? Was I talking to money? Was I talking to a parent? Was I talking to my partner? And you really start to kind of piece apart what are those emotional threads that are in that relationship. So it's such a fast way, Richard. I mean, I ask every discovery meeting I have with clients, I ask them that question. I usually work with couples, so I ask both people in the room that question. And it's fascinating what comes up. And oftentimes when I'm working with couples, they have very different responses to money walking in the room and sitting down in front of them.
In that case, how do you help them integrate their two disparate views of money? Is there a process that you use where they end up talking to each other, for example?
100. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think first and foremost, when I'm taking turns with clients, with partners, I say, okay, first and foremost, that person gets to be like the honorable witness and just witness what they're saying, right? And then hold that information and vice versa. Because what I like to tell Richard is that ultimately we get to be each other's best money friend, right? And so what happens is that because we're not having these conversations with money, we're taking out our frustrations often on our partners, because that's who we're like an intimate relationship and making money decisions with all day long. But then when you see and you witness, you're like, oh my gosh, that's how she's feeling, or that's how he's feeling with money. That makes sense why they're so tight with some decisions, or why they never look at our budget. You just start to like understand their patterns and behaviors. I mean, it's archetypal. You get to understand what are the archetypes that are at play. And I think the reality is that it helps people not take it so personal, right? I married my money opposite, where I love to track. It's what I do for a living. My husband could care less. And so we'd go out to dinner, we'd have, and he'd want to treat everyone to dinner. And I'm like, babe, that didn't fit into my monthly plan. And he's like, but that's just me being generous. So how do I judge generosity and still feel true to myself? And when we started to have our own conversations with money, Richard, we started to realize like, oh, he's teaching me something I need to learn, and I'm teaching him something he needs to learn. How do we bring the wisdom and the light aspects of our relationship to money and have them as consideration of the shadow parts that we're working through? So now we're each other's best money friends instead of what feels at times like being each other's worst money enemies.
I see. Oh, that makes sense. And I suppose in a situation like yours, the shadow side for one person would be the spendthrift, and the shadow side for the other person would be the stinge.
Exactly.
At some point, somewhere, they have to figure out how to reconcile the two. Another thing you talk about in your book is something called the money story. Would you like to explain a little bit about that?
100%. And I think it speaks to kind of that foundation beneath the money archetypes that we bring to our current relationships. Is everyone has a money story, right? We have first money memories. When did you first get introduced to money? What was that like? Was it that you got an allowance and you felt freedom to spend from a young age? Were you someone who was just working from a young age? Was money an issue growing up? And so when money comes into a conversation, you just get tense because that's what you remember. And so part of the exercise of writing out your money story and your money memories, it helps you understand too, what are some of those first emotional connections or associations that you have with money that when they remain unconscious, continue to have impact in our ability to make decisions today. So turning towards our money story allows us to bring that level of awareness and clarity to be like, oh, that's where that pattern is coming from. Or, oh, that's why I do X, Y, and Z, because I'm able to understand the environment that I came from. And what brings clarity in that too, Richard, is that sometimes we feel a lot of money shame, irregardless of how much we have, because we're often thinking we're not doing it right or someone's doing it better than me. Our relationship to money is one of these places that we feel comparison. And when you turn and do your money story with grace and gentleness and kindness towards yourself, you start to realize that there's some areas that might have been challenging in your story that you've overcome, that you faced and showed bravery, that you found courage. And so you start to kind of build a sense of money resilience of like, okay, maybe it's not easy, but I've done it. I can bring that sense of self-awareness as I plan and make decisions for the future. So it's a very enlightening and awakening process.
Well, okay, good. Well, in a way, you've answered my question because I was about to ask, well, once you have the clarity, what do you do with it? How do you
Yeah.
turn the clarity into effective action?
Do you want me to give you an example?
Yeah.
So, for example, right, in my money story, and I think one of the things that I didn't name is that in addition to your own personal money story, we have financial DNA, right? What's the money story of our families that have shaped us? In my DNA, I have this kind of strong thread of scarcity because I came from my grandfather was an Austrian Jew who fled the Second World War, right? This is not a family lineage that's, particular to me. A lot of us share it, or grandparents that were raised in the Depression. There's more of that stingy, hoardy scarcity. For my grandfather, was true fear of survival. And so over the years, I was raised where both of my parents were working professionals, but there was a sense of scarcity in the household, which was confusing to me because I'm like, wait a second, you're paying for my school, you're buying my clothes, we're going to see family in Latin America. Why do we feel scarcity? And I think that's a lot of the confusion that people often feel is like what's happening actually in our financial world doesn't necessarily match our experience of it. And so over the years, Richard, I've had to watch the ways that scarcity still bubbles up, right? I can have an aversion to waste, right? And so I don't like wasting food in the fridge, or I don't like wasting things. And my husband would rather try a different flavor and get takeout. And we've had to kind of work through our differences as we make decisions, right? But he's the one who cooks all day long. He's like, I just want a break. And I'm like, okay, how do I hold my experience of waste in check to what he needs in terms of leisure? Or I would struggle with like money mistakes, right? We'd lose AirPods, or he would forget his suitcase in a hotel. And I'm like, that's going to cost us, right? And my daughter actually came up with the idea of like, Mom, how about we just add a mistake budget, a mistake line item to our budget because we're human. I mean, she was like 10 at the time when she said that. And I was like so taken by the fact that she's like, let's just make sure that our plan gives us the space to reflect that we're going to make mistakes and we're going to grow and learn from them. And so that was me being in relationship and awareness with the patterns of scarcity that I could then use to lash out at my family members, which we know isn't conducive to anything, or I could use to bring awareness to what I need to take responsibility for. And so I think two things, both the money story and the conversation with money exercise, it helps us understand what do we have to take responsibility for, each one of us in our money patterns, because it's a lot easier to scapegoat money. And I'm inviting people to be like, hey, we waste too much effort and energy and time scapegoating money and not getting to the root of it. There's a way through, right? There's a way in which your relationship to money is a mirror into knowing who you are. And it's a transformational path.
Yeah, I mean, the scarcity pattern that you talk about, I think, is common, maybe
Yeah.
even common even to the majority of people. Why don't we look at the other side of it, which is a constant denial, the fact that you don't have enough and you're spending more than you need,
Yeah.
and the sense that you should have, maybe more of a sense of scarcity than you in fact do. How do you coach people in that direction?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And especially like in our current culture where there's like impulse buying and everything's so readily available. And so I won't start with shame, right? Because what happens is a lot of people in that situation will be like, I refuse to do a budget because it's just going to tell me what I already know. I'm overspending. So I have to approach it from a different angle, and I have to kind of break it down. Okay, tell me about your spending, right? And really what I'm listening for, Richard, is what are the needs they are trying to meet? Because the fact of meeting needs is fundamental, and that is human. So I can't take away the desire to meet a need. What I can help them is become more skilled at how do they meet that need, perhaps with non-monetary ways, So for example, I talked about in this book, I had a client who came to me who was overspending on dining out. And I was like, what are you like, where are you going? He's like, well, that's how I'm meeting people. I'm dating and I'm picking up the first bill. And we had a great conversation. And his point was like, I just went through a divorce. I want to connect to people, but it never goes to a second date where maybe we would then split the bill because I'm actually still grieving. I'm like, okay, let's get the dating aside for a second. How do you grieve? Right? Let's create a better plan, a more cost-effective plan to help you grieve so that we're not letting money flow in a direction that is putting you in this credit card debt. That's not helping anyone. So I have to understand what that deeper need is, because once I hit that chord of what's driving the behavior and bring awareness to that, we can choose new behaviors.
Very good. Well, that's helpful. Well, let's stick on the subject of dating because this is a sore spot for many people. I'm married, so I'm not in that world anymore. But when you are dating, money issues are around, and all gender equality aside, the man is really expected to pick up the check, at least for the first couple of times. And beyond that, it gets a little shady. So how do you suggest people, and I mean, both parties deal with money in terms of dating?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is like decoupling the idea that a date means going out to expensive dinner, right? Because I mean, that's where my brain goes as you're describing what you're saying, Richard. And the reality is, I think in today's day and age, you can have a first date by going on a hike. You can have a first date by going out for a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a glass of wine, right? So you can bring awareness to, and I think this is great for both parties. If I were to pick up the bill 100%, what is the thing I want to invite to? So that if you do end up picking up the bill, and maybe it becomes, you're like, this was a great date, I want to treat this person, you can do it within parameters that you've already digested works for your plan, without setting yourself up to have a really expensive dinner and being like, oh my God, now I'm sweating it if I have to pick up all of the bill. It's going to like take anything that was good in the date and like check it out the window. So I tell people, be more intentional on how you set up that first date. And the reality is there's a lot of ways to have a first date that don't require spending a dime.
Very true. Very true. Why don't we go to the larger issue of money in society today and attitudes toward money in society today? Everyone has, as you say, a financial DNA. Some of this is, familial, but some of this is collective. It's national. It's cultural. Could you talk a little bit about our collective financial DNA and how you see it manifesting in individual cases?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Richard. And a part of me took a deep breath because it's a big question. And it's almost like, is it cultural DNA or is it cultural Kool-Aid that we're drinking, right? Because this is where I really wanted my book to have a contribution, because what I want to put out there is that that we can define wealth differently. So let me take a step back. How do I see our cultural DNA or the cultural Kool-Aid that we're drinking shape us? Is that we think money and wealth are the same thing. And then we think that more money equals more success, more self-worth, more value as a person. And even if we're doing personal help on ourselves, it's kind of always in the background, right? And how we talk about money is so in numerical terms that it's really hard not to put ourselves into a comparative analysis. That's why we don't ask, how much do you make, Richard? How much debt do you have? How much investments you have? Because I'm situating it within a comparative framework. And the reality is someone's always going to have more than you or less of you. And we're kind of trying to like situate ourselves. So part of why I wrote the book without any formulas, even though I love math, right? I do math for a living, was to give people a doorway in to have conversations around money that wasn't so comparative. Let's talk about memories. Let's talk about what did our parents teach us and what they did not. So it gives us a different entry point because we don't talk enough about money, right? Money is still a cultural taboo, and we need to talk more about it to start to loosen that unconscious, subconscious thread of how we define it. And then what I'm offering as a different way of defining money is first recognizing that money and wealth are different things, right? Money is a tool and a technology. It's an important tool and technology. It definitely facilitates exchange. It allows us to have opportunities, purchases, experiences, etc. But it's a tool and it's a technology, much like, our iPhones or what other technologies we use. Wealth is a state of well-being. And as we start to kind of redefine wealth as a state of well-being connected to the fulfillment of our human needs, and start to recognize that we have agency to design how we satisfy those human needs, and we can do it in monetary and non-monetary ways, we start to loosen the dependency, right? We start to loosen the codependency that we have with money and find how to be in right relationship where it doesn't define us. It's just one more tool I can use to fill out how I fulfill my needs.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with a question on one remark that you just made, which is our cultural taboo about money. I mean, to all external appearances, not only is there not a taboo about talking about money, one wonders if people talk about anything else. I go to the health club, and there's a screen in front of me where some rather unappetizing looking guy is giving financial advice with
Yeah,
stock.
no, you're right.
So
Yeah.
it seems like it's all over. It's omniscient. People don't think about anything else. So could you explain a little bit more about what you...
I thank you for that. Thank you for that. And maybe the clarification is I feel like we're being talked at all day long, right? To your point, the news, the headlines, the flashes, the podcasts. So we're being talked at, but we're not digesting it and talking about how it impacts in our personal life outside of very private spheres, right? Outside of our financial advisors and our CPAs and our spouses. Even sometimes parents don't even like talking about it with their kids. And I see that because I'm working with multi-generational families. I'm like, wait, you guys don't even know what's happening here. This is going to be a mess when one of you die, right? And so that's the difference. We're being talked at, almost bombarded, and to some extent we're like numb at times. We're like, what does all this mean? But we're not digesting what does it mean for me and how do I truly experience wealth? And I think that's the missing link.
Interesting. Well, let's take up another subject you just brought up. And this is certainly a major issue, which is the transfer of wealth through generations.
Yeah.
It would seem that this is a great way to lose wealth. It also seems to be a great way for any family resentments to surface. The parent dies and suddenly the kids are fighting. They may be fighting about something that happened when they were 8. Obviously, a lot of emotions are brought up at that time. So how do you suggest that people navigate that kind of transition?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say start early. And even if you're not ready, I'm kind of speaking to the higher generation or the older generation, even if you're not ready to reveal dollar amounts, start by helping the next generation understand the physical structure, what's there, right? Who do they need to contact with something, just to feel like the estate planning process so that they don't inherit a mess that they've never been exposed to. I think that's one. Number 2, I've had families have a great deal of success by writing family vision statements and family mission statements, right? Because I think to some extent there's the generation that worked really hard to make it, right? Or they've been steward and protecting it. And obviously, to your point, there's the risk of losing it in further generations because the next generation may just have different values. And I think the really important piece is that the reality is the most successful transfers of wealth is where there are spaces and dialogues to communicate the differences in values and not come to the table saying, I'm trying to convert you to my values. That is not going to work, right? You're going to get a rebel in the room who'll be like, I'll wait till you're dead and I'm going to do my own thing. It's a lot more fruitful if you bring to the table all the different values and visions, because then you get to co-create and co-design what the possibility can be for the future One generation might see something from a different angle that they had not considered. They might learn a lot about the next generation because, like, oh, wow, that's what's really important to you, right? This generation might actually be like, there's wisdom in the room I should be listening to. And so when you create a space to cultivate these family visions and family missions, again, it takes on a depth and meaning where ultimately our relationship to money is meant to help us show up more fully in the material world instead of creating division and divide. So it takes courage, right? It takes bravery to have these conversations, but generally speaking, when I see families go through it, they are transformed in remarkable ways. And there's a legacy, not just a financial legacy, but an emotional, spiritual, and energetic legacy that starts to take shape.
It's very difficult for me to imagine this kind of discussion that you've just described taking place without a moderator.
Yes, 100%.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's very difficult for me to imagine any family that without some kind of, person like you isn't like, hey, let's keep things in perspective here. Because in most cases, I imagine most families, including the ones I know best, it's just like everyone gets into their own position and, the
100%.
usual acquisitions and, issues come up. So do you moderate discussions like that?
Yes, yeah, I do. And I mean, and there's people who do this for a living, and I actually would agree. It's almost like there's some of my hardest conversations that I've had with my husband have been in therapeutic containers, right? Because we both want to feel heard. And I think that's really important. And so I 100% agree that they should be held spaces, but I think they're they're transformational space. And I think that's sometimes where people are like, oh, this feels terrible to even think about doing something like this. But the reality is that when we get things off of our chest, it may not happen immediately, right? To your point, grievances may bubble up, but better to have those grievances bubble up so that we can work with them than them create resentment and tear apart families at at death, because we've also seen that happen as well. And so I'm going to say an important piece. A lot of things that a lot of times I tell my clients, my job is to separate what pertains to the world of money and what does not. And what I mean by that is that when we're having these conversations or family constellations, right? Or when we're having these conversations with partners, is to be like, okay, tell me the grievances, because then, okay, this is what I need to bring to our analysis and spreadsheet. So it pertains to the world of money. This is something that is being touched and triggered and awakened, a catalyst by money, but it pertains to the world of therapeutic space where we need to work on it, right? And that's why I love my job, right? I get to talk to people. They come to me and they often walk out the office saying, like, that felt like financial therapy, because they can't hide when we're looking at spreadsheets. I can look at the spreadsheet and be like, is this a perceived fear or a real fear, right? Is your house on fire and you feel like you're going to lose all your money? Or is that a deeper, energetic, scarcity financial DNA that we need to work on? And doesn't necessarily make it easier to go there, but I can have clarity of like, oh, financial plan works great. We need to take care of this, because if I don't, no matter how much money this person has, they're not going to experience wealth because they have all this cloud of an experience of scarcity that keeps them separate from the ability to enjoy the resources they have. So it's both in transfer of generations, but it's also in your own ability to experience what you've built.
Well, of course, one main reason for failure of adequate transfer is the lack of any will. I mean,
yes. Oh my
will
gosh.
is a document, and
Yeah.
a lot of reasons that people don't write wills is that it reminds them they're going to die, which is for most people a terrifying thought, even though because it's true. So if someone comes to you with that kind of issue,
Yeah.
that's just kind of avoidance of this whole matter, just doesn't want to think about it, how do you work with them?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I'm not an estate attorney or estate planner, so I can't necessarily help clients through wills and trusts. but I have done my due diligence and screened some really good professionals that are kind and aware that this is a hard conversation. Because I agree 100% with you, Richard. No one wants to talk about death, right? Or that's not true. Some people love talking about death, but most of us don't. And so it really takes, I mean, so there's people out there who can bring that sensitivity to the topic and still help you get through the process of writing a will or writing a trust. Depending on what state you live in, one or the other makes a difference. And even though I can't do that for clients, if I'm working with someone and they don't have that in place, at every meeting, I will ask, so did you talk with so-and-so? Where are we on that? Because ultimately, if they do write a trust, I will then retitle brokerage accounts, or I will use that for beneficiaries. So I do need that information, and I will gently nudge them along the way. And I tell them this is equally important to the process we're doing. The other place I see it kind of with the younger parents, like if you have a kid, one of the things you do is that you buy life insurance, right? Because if you pass prematurely, you want to make sure that your family is taken care of, right? And it's also no fun. I remember I got my policy when I had my daughter at 32, and I'm like, I'm not going to die, right? And the reality is, I'm 47, I'm still here, and I'm going to live till 95, I hope. But every time I would get cut off in the highway, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have that policy, right? And so it does. And here's a really important piece: when we tackle that list of financial to-dos, right? Because it's really important. It will bring you peace of mind that helps you have a deeper relationship with money. Because if not, the unresolved list is like this interference that is just always talking to us. So I tell people when they come into the office, what's the list? Give me all 20 items that you're like, this feels unresolved, and we just tackle it one at a time. And if I can't help them, I'll refer them to who can, but I'll just keep asking, hey, did that happen? With a smile.
I'm sure with some people you have to ask more than once or more than twice, but
oh my gosh, it's on it's on almost like on a monthly reminder. And then
right.
I tell them, until you tell me to stop, we'll keep going.
Right. So, well, let's go on to something a little more abstract, which is question I keep coming back to: what is money to begin with? I mean, I took, some kind of basic ec course in college, and I know, the conventional answers, but I was just thinking, I remember during the 2008 crash, $1 trillion of value was wiped out almost overnight. Yeah. That is to say, $1 trillion existed one day and did not exist the next day. It just vanished. And it's a question of like, well, what is this money stuff anyway? How do you answer that question?
It's a great question. I'm smiling. I'm married to a philosopher. So we have lots of interesting conversations about this all the time. And I think, and I really wrestled with this in chapter 2 of my book, where I talk about money as a social technology. And what I mean by that is that it's an agreement, right? It's an agreement that we use a lot of times between people that we don't know to have a method of exchange. So let me back it up for a second, right? So let's go back in time when we lived in smaller communities, right? So people knew each other, and they knew who we were, and they knew how trustworthy we were, and were we showing up, were we contributing, right? Would you lend me something if I need? And we had kind of an intimate relationship that did supply a lot of our basic needs, right? As our communities grew, and we are out now in these modern cities, and we don't have that level of exchange. If I walk into a coffee shop, the barista doesn't know me, but they know the currency I'm using. So there is a societal agreement that if I hand them a $20 bill, that is worth $20, right? So there's that kind of basic level of there's a way in which money helps us communicate value so we can create exchange. So that's the technology piece. I think the shadow of that technology is that because we've lost those intimate relationships with kind of our deeper communities and clans, is that sometimes now we think money is how we need to express the value of trustworthiness. It's like credit worthiness is now, overshadowing trustworthiness. So that's a little bit of the shadow in terms of our psyche. But what it is, right, is that it is a social technology that is constantly changing forms. I mean, even in my lifetime, right? The amount of cash I would use growing up, to then my mom taught me how to balance a checkbook and I'd write checks, to then getting my first credit card, to now using digital assets on my phone, right? My daughter barely ever touches cash at 14. So see how it's changed forms and changed shapes over time. So you can't really say money is a thing because it will constantly be changing form, but it's an agreement that we use to assign to value. And to your point, Richard, when we go through these market cycles, right, and housing value comes down and mortgages are going up, and so we wipe out trillions of dollars on the balance sheets, that can happen because as a market, we're assigning a different level of value to houses, to companies, to stock. And that's where it gets to be a little bit confusing at times. And there's different types of asset that can support the value that it has. And some are very speculative. And it's truly just an agreement.
Very good. Thank you. So what do you think of crypto?
Oh, so I'm not supposed to talk about crypto from a compliance standpoint.
Really?
So I can't say too much. No, it's still not regulated by the SEC. So from a compliance standpoint, we cannot advise clients on crypto.
And you can't even speak in general about it?
I mean, in general, I can, but I can't say too much about it. What I would say is that I would consider it to be a speculative asset, right? It's not necessarily based on kind of a balance sheet. Like if I were to buy a stock in Apple, right, I'm buying it based on current earnings, current technology, what the products are. Like there's actual real value to the products they're creating. Crypto, I think, has a future youth that can have value to it. It's not I wouldn't consider it a currency so much, but it being more of a speculative asset. If I have clients who ask me about it, what I can tell them, Richard, much like any other speculative asset, I would keep it to 5% of their liquid assets, right? And so, because some people will go buy art, which is also a speculative asset. So I'm not saying don't have it as part of your portfolio, but one, it has to be a portion that you're totally fine losing if it loses its value. And two, it should never be over concentrated compared to anything else.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, in your book, you mentioned that you were the great niece of the philosopher Edmund Husserl,
Yes.
whose name you share. And could you talk a little bit about his ideas and how they've influenced you? Because I gather they have.
Yeah, and especially again being married to a philosopher who's deeply read Husserl and Heidelberg and etc. So I would say, I think it's the somatic piece, and I close my eyes, right? Because he's a complex philosopher, but his notion of going back to the essence of the things themselves is what's really stuck with me. That kind of the bracketing exercise, and what I mean by that, I explain in the book, but the bracketing is as you start to describe an experience, a visceral experience in this world, and you start to take out the common words that you would use to describe it, you're almost guided to this nonverbal expression of the essence of what you're experiencing. So I think for me, Richard, that's been the biggest kind of takeaway from that lineage, is because that's what embodied wealth is, right? The ability to take out all these notions of what we think money to be, what we think wealth to be like, am I actually experiencing the essence of life? And for me, it's like that fulfillment, that satisfaction, that satiation that I am living a life of meaning requires at times taking out the interference and the noise, right? So I think in terms of the inspiration that he's brought to me is that, the practical technique of bracketing, right? So I do that often in my life as I'm trying to understand how to best find strategies and how to experience meaning and not just describe it, or not just be in my mind center or my heart center. It's really a visceral experience, as well as just that question of what is the essential nature of our experience.
Could you go on just a little bit more about what you mean by bracketing?
Yeah, so a great example. For example, I love to dance, right? I'm Latin. I was in my Zumba class this morning, and I can sit here and say, okay, Richard, so I love to dance Zumba because I gather with a group of Latin women and we just dance, sing, and express our hearts out. So bracketing would mean, let me describe that to you again and take out some of those key words, right? And so I love to dance Zumba because when I'm there, I'm able to feel my heart just connect to my body and it just feeds me a different way. And I just go deeper and deeper and deeper, almost to the place of like, I don't have words to describe, but I can feel that essential moment because taking out, right, the mental exercise of taking out the words is guiding me to deepen my awareness of what I'm trying to describe. And it takes me to an experiential place that I wasn't at when I started describing it, right? And it takes me closer to that experience of the essence itself.
Very good. Well, that's very helpful. I was actually looking through a book I have on phenomenology today just to kind of brush up for this interview. And my impression of it was that phenomenology says something very much like what you just did, except that the verbiage and concept just multiplies like some dragon, like the noetic, noematic,
Yeah.
it's like, well, that's a criticism not of you, but of 20th century
Mhm.
philosophy. So I don't know what your husband would think of that, but
And I
anyway.
would say, actually, I feel fortunate because I went to CIS and I was able to study with Don Johnson, who is a somatic, right? So he took phenomenology more applied to somatic psychology, which is kind of a different angle, which I personally relate to, right? I think my husband would love to sit here and kind of like debate the philosophical components of it. I'm just much more of a somatic, visceral person, and I think to some extent, in a very Latina female body, I'm able to express the lineage in a different way.
Mhm, mhm. Okay. Okay. Well, I think I'm coming to the end of my questions, and we're coming to the end of our time. So I'm wondering if you have any last comments or thoughts that may not have come up in the last hour or so.
Yeah, um, in my preparation for this, I received the Seven Games of Life, right? Your book that I don't know if you sent it, but it was someone on your team, which I loved because I only had 2 days, so I didn't get to have a deep dive in it. But I really loved kind of the synergy, right? Of I think the more clarity, Richard, we get at what are we up to as humans, right? You use the Seven Games, I use the Wealth Mandala, which is a tool to help people just start to understand our relationship to our human needs. I feel like life just takes on a deeper dimension, right? And when we're able to do that in application to very practical, tangible things like money, it's almost like, I can feel like my eyes just widening where it's like the beginner's eyes. I just see things in a new way, in a new fashion. And so I would leave this to listeners, right? I chose the subtitle to the book on purpose, finding joy in your relationship to money. Because most people find dread and groan in their relationship to money, right? And I actually think there's ways to find joy in it when you use your relationship to money as a mirror into knowing who you are and as a process for self discovery. And I just want to plant that seed that it's possible. And I wrote the book with a lot of different exercises and mini moments and questions for people to ask themselves, and not just to ask yourself, but to be in conversation with those around you. Because the more we talk about it, the more we loosen some of the deeper emotional constraints that we feel. So I do 100% believe we can find joy in our relationship to money. And there's a lot of excitement and vitality there for everyone to explore.
Well, that's been wonderful. This has been a fascinating and enlightening conversation. I've enjoyed it very much, and I know our viewers will too. So thank you very much, Elizabeth, for taking the time to discuss your work and your latest book, The Power of Enough. And I wish you much success and hope our paths will cross again.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.